Alright Exile, so we're back in Path of Exile 2, and in today's video I wanted to talk to you guys about Path of Exile 2. I have been seeing a massive influx of players asking some basic questions, some interesting questions, and just general questions about Path of Exile 2 that they didn't actually know. I did a video not too long ago that discussed some of this stuff, but I want to go a little bit more in detail about some of these mechanics and maybe even clear some things up. And seeing that Path of Exile 1 and Path of Exile 2 is going to be coexisting with one another, I want to point out the key differences and kind of give players a better understanding of what to expect from PoE 2. So first things first, let's talk about the important stuff a lot of you guys asked me, and that is how to gain access to Path of Exile 2. Now in my previous video I kind of talked about it. I want to be a little bit more concise on this. There's going to be multiple ways to get access to Path of Exile 2. The first one is going to be waiting for the full release of the game, and you will have 100% free access to the game. Keep in mind, what's happening on December the 6th is early access. This is not the full release of the game, and as of what we know now, and very likely for a long time, we do not know when Path of Exile 2 is going to be released into its full state. So if you're not willing to shell out cash, because there is going to be cash that you need to shell out or have a like a threshold, you will have to wait until Path of Exile 2 officially releases. Want to make sure that's pretty clear, because this was something a lot of people were confused about. The ways to get access outside of waiting for the full release is going to be a couple of ways. First, you're going to have to pay for a supporter pack. As of releasing this video on the 17th or 18th, depending on when I release this, we do not know how much the supporter packs are. For what we know and what we are speculating on the 21st, which I will have a updated video with all the information that we know, that's when we believe that we're going to get information on how to pay for a supporter pack, the cost, and all that stuff. Make sure you're following the channel here, because I'm going to keep you guys up to date on all that stuff, as well as the in-game information that we're going to be getting on the 21st, because we haven't had a lot of information about that. But in terms of payment, we're going to have to wait until the 21st to get that information. I will pin this down in the comments whenever we actually get that information, so you guys can refer back to this video if you want to know. The other ways to get access is if you are a long-time player like myself and you have spent over basically $500, you will get 100% free access to Path of Exile 2 with no additional costs. These are the key ways you're going to get access: pay for a supporter pack, have paid for $500 or more, or wait for the full launch of the game whenever that comes. Now that we understand how to gain access, the other thing you must know is how Path of Exile 1 and Path of Exile 2 will coexist. And from what we know of what Grinding Gear games have said, they will coexist to one another, and they're going to have seasons that rotate with one another. Yes, a lot of the seasonal content from Path of Exile 1 will be transferring over to Path of Exile 2, and some of the footage that we've seen Ritual, we've seen I believe Settlers, we've seen some of the mechanics from Path of Exile 1, or the seasons from Path of Exile 1 to PoE 2, so expect that to be there, but they will be rotating seasons, and that's kind of how they want to do it. The other thing that's super important to note, and this is kind of more on the technical side that I'm not going to put in the category, anything that you pay for in Path of Exile 1 will be over on Path of Exile 2. So if you buy something today, let's say you want to get some stash tabs, that will transfer over to PoE 2. Let's say you do it after the launch of PoE 2, that at least Path of Exile 1, it will go to Path of Exile 2. Part of the reason why there's a delay is because they want to make sure that players who have spent tons of money on the game actually get their MTX, all their cosmetics, all their stash tabs, and all that stuff that came with Path of Exile 1 over to PoE 2. This is a great thing that they're doing, and though I hate that there was a delay, this is why they delayed it, and I think this is actually really admirable. No development team would do this, and you know, that's really important to note. So the next thing I want to talk about is some of the more basic stuff, like the Ascendancies and the classes, and there's going to be a total of 12 classes available in Path of Exile 2. Some of these are known to not necessarily be available in early access. We don't know which ones that's going to be, but know there's going to be 12 classes, which all will have 3 additional Ascendancies tied to them, for a total of essentially 36 classes. Ascendancies will transfer or make the classes significantly different from one another. A tanky guy could in theory be a caster. It's all going to be dependent on how you build the class, and that's the beauty of Path of Exile. There's going to be a lot of freedom. In terms of the classes available, there's going to be Warrior, Marauder, Duelist, Mercenary, Huntress, Ranger, Monk, Shadow, Witch, Sorceress, Druid, and Templar. My 2 personal favorites I'll be covering pretty heavy on this channel is going to be Mercenary as well as Warrior. I'm going to put a lot of effort into those because they look really cool. But those are the classes and the Ascendancies to expect. One thing you need to understand about classes, for those who have never played Path of Exile 1, is that classes are very different from a lot of ARPGs. As I said a second ago, you may pick a class that's like the Warrior, but that does not mean the Warrior is forced to play strength-based things. It may be beneficial depending on the Ascendancy, but you can do whatever you want. There's a ton of skill gems. There's a ton of skills. It's not like a skill tree where you pick skills like in other games like Diablo 4, but passive and active skill gems that you find on the ground that you will slot into your character to basically be able to use skills. Any class can pick them up, any class can use it, and that's the beauty of Path of Exile. You get a lot of complexity and a lot of like freedom that you don't see in a lot of ARPGs. So make sure you know, while you may be a witch or you may be a warrior, that does not define your playstyle. How you build it will define it. One thing for my seasoned Path of Exile players need to know is when it comes to the passive skill tree, they're going to be doing something a little bit different when it comes to what we're going to expect to see on the passive tree. I haven't seen it all, keep in mind, but what we know is there's not going to be any life nodes, and why this is significant is because it's going to make it so that the tree is more complementary to your build rather than reliant on the tree to make up for your shortcomings. I'm sure there's going to be things like that within the passive tree, but they're going to be removing life and things like that so that your build can be more complementary whenever you go into the passive tree. As far as I know, every class is going to start at the center of the tree, which in my opinion means there's more freedom of choice. You're not necessarily always forced to just go to the intelligence stuff as a witch. You can kind of choose what you want, and I think this is a very welcome and smart change. While we're talking about skill trees, and this is kind of important, depending on the weapons that you use, each individual weapon is going to have skill trees tied specifically to them. A good explanation for this will be very simple. Let's say you are someone who uses a lot of physical based damage, and let's say you have a sword. So whenever you use a physical based skill, your character will pull out the sword automatically and use it. Let's say, for example, for some reason you're using fire within that build, a fire staff or something, there's a fire skill. Your weapon will swap to, whenever you activate that fire skill, you will swap to the fire-based staff and use it, and those passives will be tied specifically to your fire-based skills, which in my opinion will lead to way more diversity in builds. And this is really important because in Path of Exile 1, in a lot of cases, you're kind of locked into one style of play, and this is going to give a lot more freedom in builds. This means you'll very likely be able to have a mobbing and a bossing build, meaning you can use one type of setup to kill bosses and another type of setup to kill a lot of weaker mobs, and this is going to be a lot more diversity in builds. The other key important thing to know about skills, and this is more specific to skill gems, in Path of Exile 1, what you currently have is you'll get skill gems, you will put them into your pieces of gear, you will socket them into individual pieces of gear that have gear sockets, and you will have to change colors and adjust them in order to get your perfect build. This has been totally revamped in Path of Exile 2. You're going to be able to find uncut gems, support gems, and regular gems that can be kind of RNG in nature, and you can use them, and the gems themselves will have the skill slots directly tied to the skill gem. You can slot them into your character. I believe it was like 8 or 9 that you can slot in passively, and then you can build off of them. Now you're not going to be held back from the fact that you may or may not have the slots available in your gear, which takes a lot of RNG out of leveling, RNG out of the game, which is actually really nice. Gems can be upgraded in a variety of ways. We don't know exactly how they're going to be fully upgraded because there has been some changes that we may or may not know about. I don't want to specifically say in this video because I'm not 100% sure, but you will be able to upgrade your gems in a variety of ways outside of just kind of killing with them, and that is really cool. Ending this section off, I want to talk about bosses, because bosses and how they differ from PoE 1 is they're going to be controlled more. What this means is they're going to have a bar under their health, and this is going to signify whatever control effect that you've been applying on them actually has hit them, and now you can like CC them to some degree. Keep in mind, this will have diminishing returns from all that I can tell, and while you will be able to stun bosses, freeze them, and things like that, either way is going to give crowd control an actual place in Path of Exile 2. And this is a very similar system that you see in Diablo 4, so my Diablo 4 players should be very familiar with this mechanic on how you stun bosses. The other thing that's kind of hit or miss depending on the player you are, the way bosses will work is if you die, you will have to come back and the bosses will be fully reset on their HP. As I said, this could be hit or miss depending on the player that you are. If you are a player who enjoys challenge, this can be pretty nice for you. If you are a player who may not exactly know how to build a character and you may die, this could also be a problem for you. I know PoE 1 has this problem where it's not necessarily easy on how to scale a character, and this could be one of those things that actually kind of hurt you, but we'll have to see how this works. I don't love it, I don't hate it, I'm kind of in the middle. Let me know what you think about that. But yeah, bosses gonna be controllable. You need to make sure you don't die because you will have to fight them over again. Now on to objectively the most important thing, and I think the thing that I'm really excited for is the crafting and how it's gonna differ from Path of Exile 1. From what the team has said, the way crafting is going to work is it's going to be more of a building rather than a destructive type of crafting. For example, in Path of Exile 1, there are things like an Orb of Annulment that will remove affixes, and it becomes, in my opinion, something of a gambling game to some degree to be able to craft that perfect item. That's not to say that Path of Exile 2 is going to be easier, but it's going to be more of getting an item that you desire and more building it rather than destroying it and trying to kind of gamble around it. Some players may like this, some players may hate it. I like it because I think having players have the ability to craft more effectively and be more of a building situation than a destructive situation is way better. But yeah, crafting is going to be getting a rework, and I think it's going to be significantly more accessible to players. Finally, I want to talk about my console players because this is actually pretty important. It's not just console players, but there's going to be the ability to cross save. If you do have an account on PlayStation like I do right now, you cannot jump on your PC and play. If you do have it on PC right now, you can't go to your PlayStation and play, or whatever console you have. I have a PlayStation. They're going to be having it so that you can actually play on both. So you can jump in your bed if you don't feel like farming on your PC and play. Same and vice versa is really nice. Keep in mind, items from PS5 or Xbox is going to transfer over to Path of Exile 2 as well, so you will have your items, console players. And speaking of console, and this is not necessarily tied to console, but when I think of console, I think of couch co-op. There will be couch co-op, so you can jump in and play with your friends that you have in real life, if you have any of those, or your mate, or whatever the case is. And you can actually use your profile from your save and play with them, and you can save it. So this is actually a really cool system because you can play with your friends. Finally, I would love to cover the end game, but honestly, we haven't seen any information about the end game. We're gonna get end game information on the 21st. I will have a dedicated video on the 21st, maybe a couple hours after, breaking down everything you need to know about the end game. We don't have any information about the end game. From what we can tell from looking at the game, it's much of a slower paced game from Path of Exile 1. I'm not sure how this is going to ramp up in PoE 2. If it's gonna be a little bit more slower and methodical, we don't know that yet, but I will keep you guys up to date on the end game. We will see this on the 21st. In closing, I'm super excited to jump into Path of Exile 2. I'm expecting Path of Exile 2 to be a completely different game. I'm going in with the intention of playing a completely different game. My Diablo 4 players may not like it, my PoE 1 players may not like it, but I do think it's worth giving a try. If I had to make an educated guess, I think it's probably going to be $30 to $40, so that's going to be fairly cheap, and I think you're going to get a lot of good hours out of playing it. I think you'll get at least 40 hours out of playing it just from the campaign alone, so it's going to be really cool. I'm going to be pretty much keeping a very close eye on this game. This is one of the games I've been waiting for a very long time. So make sure you are subscribed to the channel if you want to know things about builds, news, and just pretty much everything related to Path of Exile 2, because we're going to be pumping pretty crazy leading into the launch and beyond for PoE 2. We still have a couple of weeks to go, but it should be here pretty soon. And yeah, I'll see you in the next one pretty soon. Later.